Today we're going to talk about genetics, and if we think about genetics, your genetics is your genes or your DNA. So all of your DNA is organized into these chromosomes, which this whole thing right here is a chromosome. And that's just kind of a way to help organize your DNA. And so if you unwind them, you have DNA. And then if we take a section of that DNA that codes for a trait, that would be a gene. So along your DNA, you have thousands of different genes that code for different traits in your body. So again, over here, a gene would be a section of DNA that codes for a trait. And these traits are going to be made of proteins, so those genes really code for proteins. Then we can have alleles, which are different versions of a gene. So what that means is, let's look at the gene for hair color. Okay, so you have a gene that's coding for your hair color, but we can have different hair colors, like blonde hair or brown hair or red hair. Those are alleles, so different versions of the same gene. And they're usually represented by different letters. So you have 2 alleles per gene. Okay, you get 1 allele from mom, 1 allele from dad. Couple vocabulary words we need to know. So genotype is your genetic makeup. And I usually think of genotype as letters. Okay, so these are going to be represented by letters. So this is going to be your 2 alleles. So like big A, or big A, little a, that would be a genotype. The phenotype is the physical makeup. And I think looks. So this is what you are going to look like. So we'll put brown hair as an example. Now a dominant genotype or a dominant allele is going to be represented by a big letter or a capital letter. And these ones will show up if they're present. So like big A or big T. Okay, so we're going to use a big letter to represent them. Recessive alleles are going to be represented by a small letter or a lowercase letter, like little a or little t. Now, to have a recessive trait, you have to have 2 copies. So we'd have 2 little a's or 2 little t's for that trait to show up, because it can be covered up by the dominant allele. Homozygous, homo means same. So you're going to have 2 of the same big or small alleles. So like big A, or it could be like little t, little t. So 2 big or 2 small. And then heterozygous, hetero means different. So this is where we'll have 1 big and 1 small. So like big A, little a. Now if we put this together, homozygous, homo means same, dominant means big, so that means we have 2 big letters, like big T, big T. Homozygous recessive, again homo means same, recessive means small, so now we have 2 little letters, like little t, little t. And then again, hetero means different, so we're going to have 1 big and 1 small. So big T, little t. So homozygous dominant will always have 2 big letters. It doesn't have to be the letter T, it could be any letter, but 2 big. Homozygous recessive will always be 2 small letters, and then hetero will always have 1 big, 1 small, or 2 different ones. So we'll start with a monohybrid. Mono means 1, so this means we're just looking at 1 trait. So it says in lions, dark-colored manes are dominant over light-colored manes. Now, I always like to work these out the same way because I find that I get the right answer if I do it the same every time. And I do that by starting with my key, so what my letters are going to stand for. Now, again, it doesn't matter what letter you use. I try to pick letters that look different when they're big and small, so that when I work them out over here, I'm consistent on what is big and what is little. Because sometimes when you have letters that look the same and you put them next to each other, you don't know if you meant to put a big or a little. So I'm going to use D for dark mains because that's a good letter that looks different, big and small. So big D will be dark mains since that's our dominant trait. And then little d will be light mains since that's our recessive trait. Then where it says we're crossing a homozygous light main lion, so one parent is homozygous light, so again homo means same, and if I look at my key, light means is little d, so it means I have two little d's, with a homozygous dark main, so again homo means same, if I look at my key, dark is big D, so the genotype has to be big D, big D. Now I'm going to take my alleles from the first parent, and you can either put them here or here or here. It doesn't matter which side you put them on as long as you keep it on the same side. So you put one allele here, one allele here. I'm going to go ahead and put the alleles from the second parent here. So one big D, one big D. So these are the possible alleles that each parent can get. Now the purpose of these is to show the possible combinations of each offspring. Okay, so what this means is that every time these parents have a baby, these will be the percentages that they will show. It's not saying that they're going to have 4 babies and that these are the colors they will be, or whatever trait you're looking at. This is the percentage every single time that they have a baby. So when we fill these in, we just fill it in like a grid. So I have a big D and a little d. Here I have a big D and a little d. And I like to keep the capital letter first, just so that I know that it's going to have the dominant trait. Okay, again, I'm going to have a big D and a little d, and then big D, little d. Now these happen to be all the same. So when I write my genotypic ratio, I'm just going to list what genotypes I can make. So 1, 2, 3, 4, big D, little d, or I can say 100% heterozygous. And then the phenotype is what it's going to look like. So physical trait. So since it has a big D, the dominant allele, it's going to have the dominant color. So all of these will have dark mains. So 4 dark mains, or you can say 100%. So what that means is every time that these parents have an offspring, they have a 100% chance of having a dark main. Okay, on the other side, we're going to look at dihybrid traits, and dihybrid, di means 2, so we're looking at 2 traits. So they're worked out real similar, except we're looking at 2 different traits now. So when we have 2 traits, you're going to have 16 boxes instead of 4. So I'm going to start the same way I did with the other by making my key. So it says tall corn plants are dominant over short. So I'm going to use T for tall, so big T is going to be tall since that's our dominant trait. Little t will be short since that, and yellow corn kernels are dominant over white kernels. So I'm going to use big Y for yellow, again since it's the dominant trait, and little y for white since it's the recessive trait. Now Y is 1, sometimes people write it where it looks the same big and small, so if you're going to use Y, I would try to make it look a little different. So our first parent says we're crossing a heterozygous tall white kernel corn plant. Since we're looking at 2 traits, each parent's going to have 2 alleles per trait, so we're going to have 4 letters per parent. O stands for outsides, so the 2 outside ones, so big T, little y. I stands for insides, so I have the 2 inside terms, little t, little y. And L stands for last, so the last of each term, so little t, little y. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the other parent, so I'm just going to bring it down here so I have a little bit of room to work. So first of each term for F, little t, little y. The outsides for O, little t, little y. I for insides, little t, little y. L for last, little t, little y. Now in this case, they all ended up being the same. So again, I'm going to just take my alleles from the first parent, I'm going to put them along the top or along here, it doesn't matter as long as you keep them on the same side. So big T, little y, big T, little y, little t, little y, little t, little y. And I'm going to take the second parent and put them along the side here. Little t, little y, little t, little y, little t, little y, little t, little y. And when I fill in my boxes, I'm going to have 4 letters in each box. Now, since I kept T first here, I'm going to go ahead and keep T first in my boxes. So I just fill it in like a grid again. So it's going to be big T, and then I have a little y. The next one, I have a big T, little y. Then I'm going to have a little t, little y. And the fourth one, little t, little y. This would be a good place to pause the video and fill in the rest, and then you can check it with mine when you're done. So I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to have a big T, little y. Big T, little y. Little t, little y. Little t, little y. Third row, big T, little y. Big T, little y. Little t, little y. I'm going to have 4 letters in each box. Now, since I kept T first here, I'm going to go ahead and keep T first in my boxes. So I just fill it in like a grid again. So it's going to be big T, and then I have a little y. The next one, I have a big T, little y. Then I'm going to have a little t, little y. And the fourth one, little t, little y. This would be a good place to pause the video and fill in the rest, and then you can check it with mine when you're done. So I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to have a big T, little y. Big T, little y. Little t, little y. Little t, little y. Third row, big T, little y. Big T, little y. Little t, little y. Little t, little y. And my last row, And my last row, big T, little y. Big T, little y. Little t, little y. Little y. Little t, little y. So my genotypic ratios, I'm going to just count up how many of each different type of genotypes that I have. I only have 2 different ones in this problem. So I'm going to take my first one, and I'm going to put big T, little y, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 50%. My next genotype that I have is little t, little y, and again I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 50%. These should always add up to 16 since you have 16 boxes here. So if they don't, then you need to go back and double check them. Now the phenotypic ratio, this is where so my first one I have big T, little t. So since it has a big T, it's going to be tall. So I would say 8, tall, and since they have little y, they're going to have white kernels. So tall and white kernels. And then my second genotype, I have little t, which would be short. So 8 short. And little y means they're going to have white kernels also. So again, this could be 50% and 50%.